It has been written in truth that water is life. Can business help deliver this precious resource and conserve it as well? That is the question we examine in this edition of Business in Society.
Welcome to Business in Society. I'm John Belusek, the host of the program. On this edition, we focus on the critical global issue of water. Water, that precious resource that sustains life, but a resource that, unfortunately, we share unequally and often use wastefully. Clearly, global water stewardship deserves continuous high-priority attention. Sadly, the United Nations Development Program has estimated that the global water and sanitation crisis, quote, claims more lives through disease than any war claims through guns, unquote. But unless there's related breaking news events, the water stewardship issue, short-term and long-term, local, regional, and global, is too often, tragically, out of sight, out of mind. At Business in Society, our commitment is to report on this kind of critical issue regularly and to examine how one of the most powerful institutions in global society, business, that is, business writ large, can make a difference in crucial outcomes. What can business do, and what should it do on so great a global challenge? And perhaps more tellingly, what is business, with its many diverse stakeholders and obligations, already doing and planning in its water stewardship policy and performance? How are companies around the world integrating such humanitarian and socially responsible initiatives into their global business models? No better way to address those questions than to focus on the worldwide efforts of the United Nations Global Compact and its impactful CEO Water Mandate Program. To do that, I'm delighted to welcome to the program Gavin Power, Deputy Director of the Global Compact and head of its CEO Water Mandate Program. Gavin Power is a former journalist who has spent more than a decade helping to lead the Global Compact's many initiatives in sustainable development around the world. In addition to heading up the CEO Water Mandate, he has led the development of a number of Global Compact strategic policy initiatives, including the Principles of Responsible Investment. That's the world's largest initiative in responsible investing, and also the project Who Cares Wins, connecting financial markets to a changing world. I'm especially pleased to welcome to Business in Society my good friend and colleague of many years, Gavin Power. A very warm welcome, Gavin.
Thank you indeed, John. Great to be here.
Gavin, to begin with, it's been said that water poses one of the greatest sustainability problems for the society. And since it is a global issue, it seems as if it's only appropriate that a global coordination through an organization like the United Nations and its Global Compact is quite appropriate. Just in terms of context of the Compact, I know that you were there almost at the creation.
That's right.
Okay, but it has come a long way. And perhaps you could give us an idea of the sweep and scope of the Compact now, number of companies, participants, mission, and so forth.
Happy to. Thank you, John. The Global Compact is the UN's corporate sustainability or responsible business initiative, as we like to describe it. It is global. We operate in 140 countries around the world, global north, global south. 7,000 companies have made a commitment to 10 principles in 4 topical areas: human rights, labor, the environment, anti-corruption. The CEOs and the management teams of these companies commit to implement the 10 principles related to these 4 areas into strategy and operations in order to spread universal practices and principles throughout markets and societies around the world. And as part of the Global Compact, we launched a number of specialty topical issue platforms to address key sustainability and UN challenges: climate change, water, which we'll talk about today, women's empowerment principles, and business and peace. So we're really the UN's interface with the private sector in terms of responsible business practices and corporate sustainability.
And the CEO Water Mandate has now been in place, is it, what, 5 or 6 years?
Launched in 2007 by the UN Secretary General. as a call to action to companies everywhere to make water management and water stewardship a strategic business priority. The overall picture is quite an alarming one. We have a growing crisis in both water and sanitation. The fact is that less than 1% of water is available for human consumption, and that demand is expected to outstrip supply by 40% in 2030. The results, the drivers actually are many, from population trends, urbanization patterns, unsustainable consumption, to say nothing of climate change, which exacerbates the situation. So we have indeed an issue that has global implications, and I should add, is not just a humanitarian issue, but is a business issue.
Yes, that's the fascinating aspect of it, because when we talk about corporate social action, corporate social responsibility, sustainable development, it's important that everybody understands that there has to be a business case as well as a humanitarian commitment.
That's right.
And water certainly is a prime example of that. I'm told that something in the area of 3.5 million people around the world succumb to water and sanitation problems through disease and other deprivation. And so many of those are children, and so many of them live in the less developed countries.
No, it's a tragic story, and one that demands global attention and global cooperation. I'm just returning from a mission to India, Mumbai and the surrounding area, going through a terrible drought. Water scarcity issues are acute there. Women and girls in particular hiking for miles to fetch often very unclean, deadly water in some instances. So this is a humanitarian issue, but as we're saying, it's also an economic issue, because you can correlate water availability and safe water with economic development. And where there's no water, or water is of poor quality, as you indicate, there are health concerns. It undermines community development and national development, even global development. And therefore, it's a business issue, because business cannot thrive in societies that are dying. And so this is an issue that demands global cooperation, uniting governments, UN agencies, companies, the private sector, civil society, and other groups.
And especially groups, communities on a local basis as well.
Absolutely. And the reason I think for that is that water, in contrast to other issues like climate change, is an especially local issue. It plays out at the local level within specific river basins and watersheds. Unfortunately, in many parts of the world, water is scarce. And the UN projects that by 2030, nearly 2/3 of humanity will live in water-stressed or water-scarce regions.
And I think I saw a statistic that some 800 million people around the world these days, perhaps 1 in 9 in terms of global population, are suffering, in effect, from this kind of a crisis.
That's exactly so. Over 800 million people lack access to safe, clean, fresh water. More than 2 billion lack access to sanitation facilities, which is another related issue. And the problems will get worse because of some of the factors that I mentioned. Everything from growing global population, urbanization, industrialization patterns, growing demand for water-intensive crops. 70% of water use takes place in agriculture, so there'll be a big need to improve water efficiency within the food supply chain. But I think the point here is really that every company is a water company to some degree. Virtually all companies use water, either directly in their factories and operations or via their supply chain. But few companies actually understand their total water footprint. Within the Sea Water Mandate, we've organized roughly 100 companies who have made this commitment to this sub-initiative of the Global Compact to make water stewardship, as we call it, which is a holistic concept I'd like to come back to, a priority. And that means really looking at your total corporate water footprint, so not just your factories, but what are your suppliers doing in terms of water efficiency? And are they, in fact, potentially depriving communities of water in some way? And could they do more in terms of supporting solutions around things like water access and sanitation?
So this is a two-pronged effort in the greatest aspect of it. One is what happens in terms of humanitarian help out in the various regions, but also there's a tremendous possible contribution to water conservation in terms of how the many, many companies around the world can improve their operations in terms of water stewardship.
That's right. I think there's at least 4 aspects to the corporate need around this, the need to get involved, and the imperative. First, there's the ethical dimension. That is, contributing to solutions around a true global crisis, and helping to achieve global water security. That really is the ultimate aim: water security for all. We don't have that today. So there's an ethical imperative, a moral reason, I would suggest. Then there are some tangible business risks, and the first is physical risk. That is, you may be looking to expand in markets, emerging markets, least developed countries, where many of these issues are playing out, the water problems are playing out. But you're going to be in trouble if you're opening up factories in countries and communities that have no water. So there's business disruption issues. There's also regulatory risks in terms of governments beginning to look at things like water pricing more actively, and the issuance of licenses and permits. So there's regulatory issues here that are coming at companies. I don't think they're really prepared for. And lastly, there's the social risk, the license to operate, which we've talked about for many years, and that is the risk that if you are perceived to be stealing water, if you will, from communities in water-stressed regions, this can have enormous corporate reputation implications, and this has happened in some instances. So there are a number of, I think, really important drivers and reasons for companies to pick up this challenge.
And the compact and the water mandate conducts meetings, conferences around the world from time to time.
Yes.
There'll be one coming up shortly in Stockholm, but there was one recently in Mumbai where the India example, as it were, perhaps is worth noting. What sort of description of that experience took place there?
Well, there the focus is really on how do we connect the work of the Sea Water Mandate, which, as you said, has been going on since 2007, to a larger UN endeavor, which goes by the clunky title of the Post-2015 Development Agenda. But this is really the UN's current effort to look at potentially replacing the MDGs, the Millennium Development Goals, which expire in 2015, with possibly a new set of SDGs, Sustainable Development Goals. And so that's one aspect, but related, there will be some sort of new development framework that's put forward, we believe, at the end of 2014 to usher in the new era. And in that regard, the good news is that the private sector, particularly through the Global Compact, has been invited to take part in this process to help look at what should the global priorities be, what are the mechanisms and platforms and the practical ways that we can achieve cooperation and impact. So the Mumbai event was really an effort to link the work of the Sea Water Mandate to this broader UN agenda. And so
this is a long-term crisis, and therefore the post-2015 commitments are very important.
Absolutely. We're talking about a crisis that's going to play out in the years and decades to come.
Yeah. Well, there's some interesting commentary in the formation of the CEO mandate. For example, the mission statement, I think, is very powerful. Okay? The CEO water mandate seeks to make a positive impact with respect to the emerging global water crisis, mobilizing a critical mass of business leaders to advance water sustainability solutions. And it goes on to talk about the partnership with various civil society organizations, governments, and other stakeholders. And in the preamble to the commitment, also this kind of language I think is very striking. As leaders of business organizations, we recognize that the private sector has an important stake in helping to address the water challenge faced by the world today. It is increasingly clear that lack of access to clean water and sanitation in many parts of the world causes great suffering in humanitarian, social, environmental, and economic terms, and seriously undermines development goals. It sort of brings together both the humanitarian commitment, the ethical commitment, and again, the business case for this kind of activity. And there are, what, 6 key areas of concentration?
Right, and I don't know if you're challenging me to name all 6, but there I'll name most, if not all of them. The first is that the companies look at their direct operations, so their factories, and how to improve water efficiency. And we have great examples of companies that are reducing water consumption by between 8 and 15% in some locations. The second area is supply chain and watershed management, so looking at that supply chain and watershed kind of river basin level aspect that I mentioned. There's public policy engagement in terms of how to engage with governments in responsible ways on water governance and policy issues. There's community engagement issues, and this is really around how do you engage with the community at the very local level in terms of things like water access and sanitation. There's collective action in terms of how companies can work in partnerships, as the mission statement articulates, to bring about multiplier effects. And then lastly, transparency and disclosure. I believe that's 6. And that is really around how companies should be disclosing and reporting on their activities in relation to water. And this brings me to another point, which is that unlike other sustainability issues, water is a very controversial, hot topic. For some in the civil society world, the idea of corporates and companies getting involved in water work with the UN is uncomfortable. This is why the Sea Water Mandate, we take seriously the pledge of these 6 areas, and also require an annual disclosure. If companies fail to report on progress, we actually expel them from the program, and we have done this. But it is a sensitive, controversial area that demands hyper-transparency, in my opinion. And this is why the Sea Water Mandate operates with that philosophy of posting everything, being transparent about all our governance discussions. And this is why we hold these big events, multi-stakeholder events, such as the Mumbai event, to bring together all of these stakeholders.
Well, we have some video that illustrates all of these points, and especially in terms of the importance of companies doing the right thing, as it were, in various industries. So we're going to play that video right now.
Every activity and enterprise, from agriculture and manufacturing to commerce and tourism, relies on a stable and sufficient water supply. Increasing populations, pollution, behavioral shifts, climate change, and mismanagement are putting stress on water supplies around the world. Consumer and investor expectations about corporate water stewardship are rapidly growing. The bottom line? Water is becoming increasingly important to business. Prudent managers need to identify and mitigate the many risks that water issues pose to their businesses. Failing to do so could have consequences ranging from the disruption of operations and supply chains to global reputational impacts that can haunt a brand for years. Yet, few companies sufficiently and proactively address water risks. Leading companies are investing in water use efficiency, ensuring that their wastewater is properly treated, and encouraging suppliers to adopt responsible practices. But to fully address water risks, companies must also collaborate with others to advance the sustainable management of shared water resources. Local water challenges affect everyone in the entire watershed. This collective risk requires collective action and is the inspiration behind the UN's CEO Water Mandate initiative. The CEO Water Mandate is a unique public-private partnership initiated by the UN Global Compact and endorsed by global companies from many industry sectors. The mandate is intended to encourage collective action and foster responsibility with the development, implementation, and disclosure of corporate water stewardship practices.
Gavin, what's very impressive about that video is that the range of industries that are involved is indeed quite broad. We're talking about chemical companies and banks, a accounting firm like PwC, beverage like PepsiCo, and so there is obviously importance for that entire spectrum of industry. And I think that you're getting the membership within the CEO mandate that illustrates that.
We started with 5 companies that made the initial commitment in 2007, and now we have close to 100, as you say, that represent a spectrum of industries from apparel, construction, mining, et cetera. And this is because many of these companies now understand that they have direct footprints and impacts in relation to water. The CEO Water Mandate Initiative was never designed as a program for just water utility companies or those in the water service or supply business, if you will. It really is to appeal to companies in all industries that are using water either directly or in their supply chains, where in some cases 70% of the risks actually reside.
And to move forward in terms of something very contemporary, the CEO mandate has now established a hub, which is digital in nature, which indeed enables you to connect companies and other players, communities, and how is that playing out?
Well, we call it the match.com for water. Launched last August, almost a year ago, at the Stockholm International Water Conference. This is the CEO Water Mandate's Water Action Hub, which is the first global internet-powered online platform to matchmake companies, municipalities, community groups, NGOs, other stakeholders on very specific projects within very specific watersheds and river basins, understanding the point that water plays out at this very local level. We launched, as I say, a year ago. We now have roughly 300 projects posted on the site. These are active projects. Organizations either post projects and invite stakeholders, other partners to join those projects, or they go onto the platform, register, and then join an invitation to a project.
And there are a few examples, perhaps, of how that's playing out?
Absolutely. We have wonderful examples of projects, for example, in northern India, involving food companies and beverage companies working with farmers on groundwater conservation. We have examples of projects in South Africa led by beverage companies in particular. They're looking at drip irrigation systems in farming, which is I think something that will be very important in the coming years and decades. That is how to get farmers to be more water efficient with their crops. I should add as well rising interest from NGOs and major water groups and civil society in posting projects. So recently WaterAid, the international NGO devoted to water access and sanitation issues, posted 60 projects in countries, India, Bangladesh, many others, on water access projects for communities.
You speak of WaterAid. There are a number of other organizations that are active in terms of the water crisis. I mean, it ranges from the Maryknoll Fathers to Matt Damon and Water.org, I think it is.
Yeah.
And they are in some way working parallel or in other ways in terms of addressing this crisis?
They are. They're working. We're all sort of in the space together and finding each other, looking for alignment and harmonization. We invite many of these groups to our events, which are very open events. We include, so the companies, the 100 companies in the mandate are joined by organizations across the water spectrum, if you will, so large NGOs, local NGOs, water institutes, et cetera. All of these organizations are dedicated largely to the agenda around achieving global water security and sanitation security. They may have different areas that they're focused on, but this is sort of the general mission. And there I think we could do a lot more to cooperate globally. I should add too that in addition to the factors that I mentioned that are driving the water crisis, water governance will be a crucial, I think, topic in the years to come, and that is that some of these problems are self-inflicted. Yeah. The point is that there are natural environmental water scarcity issues, but as well, it is also the case that many governments and public authorities and societies, we're just not doing a good job managing this precious resource. And so I think a lot more needs to be done in terms of integrated national planning, linking water priorities with things like environmental objectives, food decisions or water decisions and vice versa. So there needs to be more coordination in terms of water governance and potentially pricing, understanding the new human right to water and sanitation, which was declared in 2010 as a real watershed, if you will.
Yeah, watershed. We just have a few more minutes, but I would imagine as you go forward, you're looking toward further growth, perhaps, of the mandate and some measurement, perhaps, of the effectiveness of it as well.
We are. The growth has been thrilling to see and I think reassuring. I mean, to go from 5 companies or so at launch to 100 has been exciting. I think that water remains a frontier issue for many companies. It continues to be something that companies are not sure about how to get involved in. We plan to take our work and our messages to the broader global compact universe of 7,000 companies that I mentioned, and hopefully build the Seal Water mandate from 100 companies today to maybe 300 to 500 in the next, say, 5 to 10 years. I think that would be an achievable goal, and perhaps we could even surpass that.
And that would be a matter of both prongs, as it were, being strengthened, both the humanitarian impact on the ground, as it were, and also the operations within the various companies.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right.
I'm sure, Gavin, that these programs are seen on campuses across the country where students are studying corporate social responsibility and sustainable development. What sort of a message would you give to, in effect, the next generation of folks who are going to be involved or at least very interested in these issues?
My message would be become a water ambassador. Everyone can be a water ambassador, and I think this starts with your own personal water footprint. So look at what you do in terms of your water consumption, ways in which you can improve water efficiency, and in the products that you purchase. It is a case that many products use significant amounts of water. So I think that things like virtual water and embedded water within products is something that we'll be discussing more about in the future. And I think for the students out there, it would really be also to begin to press leaders in government and business and even civil society to take this issue seriously, because it is a growing and escalating crisis. It is not receiving the attention that it deserves, and this is one of the reasons for the Seal Water mandate.
And perhaps even be active on campus in terms of making sure that their institutions are providing water stewardship.
Precisely.
Yes, yes.
Greening the campus.
Yes, greening the campus. Well, I think that's a great note to finish on. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you, John. Great to be here.
Thank you. Thank you for being with us. Join us again for the next edition of Business in Society.
For more information, please visit businessinsociety.net.